Good afternoon. For those of you who are meeting us for the first time, my name is Susanna Simpson, founder and co-director of Performance Poets. Along with co-director Judy Ireland, we want to welcome you to our monthly reading series. Since 2014, Performance Poets of the Palm Beaches has been hosting poetry readings in Palm Beach County with featured poets followed by an open mic. Now, because of Zoom, we are able to expand our audience reach and to invite poets from other regions. However, South Florida has a very robust poetry scene, and we have been and continue to be committed to providing a performance showcase for our talented local poets. Let's start with any poetry announcements. Anybody? Publications? Stacey?
Go ahead, Stacey.
My book inventory is coming out next month on Finishing Line Press. 35 years in the making.
Oh, yay!
And I would like to announce that SoFlo Pojo, South Florida Poetry Journal, is we have a special section page at the journal, and that's where we put miscellaneous things. And this time around, we're doing, sort of a poets respond to Surfside. And so we're collecting all these poems, and some of them are up on there now. In fact, Maureen is there. Don Rosenthal is in there. And I don't know who else.
Holly.
Yes, Holly, absolutely. Holly's in there. So if any of you, or if you know other friend poets or whoever has written or wants to write something regarding Surfside, have it sent to me via email. You don't have to do it through Submittable because I'm just going to curate it real quickly. And then what I do is I post it to the page. I've taken most of the stuff that I've received. I mean, there was a couple that just, not so much, but mostly everything. And the ones that I've taken are just fabulous. I mean, Holly and the rest of you guys here, just really wonderful stuff. So.
Thanks, Lenny. And I believe Deborah Di Nicola and Barbara Nightingale are having, hi Cheryl, are having a book signing on the 21st in Fort Lauderdale. And so if you are interested in that, and I know some of you are going to be flying in from out of town, just get the information from one of us. We'll be glad to share it with you. So that's, I think it's at 7. Is that right? Anybody who knows?
I believe it is,
7?
but I already had committed, and I may go anyway because it's, Barbara, but Maureen is reading on the same night.
Oh.
At what was it, Wild and Precious?
Yeah.
Maureen is reading at 7 that same night, and so I'm very conflicted.
Oh, it's a troubling thing, Lenny. Okay, so any other announcements, anybody? Okay, so we welcome all poets, lovers of poetry, and lovers of poets. Our featured readers read for approximately 20 to 25 minutes, and we ask that our open mic poets read for approximately 5 minutes or less to be sure that everyone has a chance to share. Just a little bit of Zoom etiquette. If you're going to eat a big ham sandwich, could you turn off your video? And if you're going to get up and move around, also just turn it off, and you can listen, but I don't know if we need to follow you around the house. All right. Let's see. I believe all of you have been added to our list, our listserv, so we don't have to go into that. So I'm going to introduce our first featured poet, George Held. So if I get a little teary-eyed, just bear with me. But I met George, I think it's about 20 years ago on Long Island at a workshop that he taught. And I remember thinking what a marvelous teacher he was, because I cranked out a poem right there and then in that workshop. And George then featured for a reading series that I did on Long Island at least 3 times, and has been a mentor to me, has supported me in getting my work published, and we've become friends over the 20 years, and I cherish that friendship. So I'm also have a shelf full of his books. So I would urge anybody who doesn't have a George Held poetry book to order one today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And and with that cue, Judy puts up the information. So I'm going to read his formal introduction. George Held has recently read via Zoom for Shelter Island Library, No Deer Magazine, and the Walt Whitman Birthplace Association. His translations and poems in print have appeared or are forthcoming in Corona, an anthology, First Literary Review East, and Blue Unicorn. He has also received 11 Pushcart nominations and published 3 poetry books and 14 poetry chapbooks and 4 children's books. And with that, I give you George Held.
Right, George, yeah.
Thank you very much, Susanna, who I call Mia for reasons I won't embarrass her by naming right now. And as I told Mia, Susanna, I would be forced to read like a youth from my cell phone because I have no printer here in Sag Harbor. My printer is lonely in New York right now, in the city. So the first poem that I'm going to read from my cell phone is called Corona Compost, and it's indebted for the idea to Walt Whitman's wonderful poem, The Compost, which few people know, but which is in the original Leaves of Grass. So if you have any inclination toward Whitman, after you hear this poem, you might want to go to your Whitman and read it, read The Compost. Corona Compost. I composed this poem for an anthology published at the Walt Whitman Birthplace Association about the recent pandemic. How we fear the infected earth, ridden with the pestilence of the coronavirus, which rises miasma-like from every homeless stoop and every cemetery, every litter of no return, where the soon-to-be corpses gasp their last breaths. Quo vadis, goes the old refrain again. But this compost made from corona corpses is clean as a newborn fawn. This compost is pure and nourishing. Mix it well in every furrow you plow. Mix in your corn seed, your potato eyes, your dried beans. Let the compost combust with the drenching rain and the sultry summer sun. Let the coronavirus cause this compost to grow our crops and renew us in the never-ending cycle of death and life. Now, that poem is somewhat atypical of what I've been writing lately. That poem is like my earlier poems, many of which were about nature or planting. And here's a poem that's more typical of what I've been thinking about lately. It's called Never Criticize a Nazi. Never criticize a Nazi unless you have spoken out in church or synagogue or demonstrated in the streets against your own fascist regime as it squelches one civil right after another. I know, long as the sheriffs concentrate on the Muslims and the Blacks and the Latinx, we can calmly complain among ourselves about the increasing nastiness and aggression as the other is whisked off to prison and to the camps now being built in the Pine Barrens. I've seen them beyond the view of the casual observer of all the nastiness and aggression. And besides, it'll be more peaceful for a while, long as we keep resistance to ourselves and act the part of loyal citizens. We know the primacy of loyalty today in ignoring nastiness. Have you calculated, like an actuary, how long it will be before they invade your house at 2 a.m. and drag you before your cousin, the magistrate, for arraignment as a traitor? Anyhow, it won't be too long unless you switch from Chris Hayes to Tucker at 8 p.m. and wear a handsome red ball cap that says, "Keep America Great." Oh, yes, and never criticize a Nazi. Achtung! This poem is called Strange, and thanks, Jamie. This poem is called Strange Encounter. And it's kind of a compromise between my nature poems and my political poems. It's called Strange Encounter. Absorbed in my computer, I sense motion above the screen and look up to see a little brown mouse with big ears emerge from under the sofa. And we stare at each other for a moment. He looks so cute and harmless, but I know he could be harbinger of 100 behind the wall. And I shout, "Hey," across the 10 feet between us. But he don't wait to wave my greeting and darts back under the sofa and out of sight. I then turn back to my machine, but I feel strangely moved by this strange encounter. This poem is as vulgar as its subject. It's called Donald Trump Receives a Rejection Slip. And the speaker is the former president when he was president. Those cock-sucking editors don't know who they're fucking with. When the Donald pens a poem with his base in mind, the guardians of the gates to creation better say yes. They better know my oranges, that is, where I sprung from, or they're likely to get roughed up or worse. These artsy fartsy types are sad, very sad, as my father said, who was born in a beautiful village in Germany. Those were the days when geeks like Pocahontas and Pencil Neck had to keep their noses to the grindstone or they'd be roughed up or deported. Though I admit the immigration laws weren't as strict in those days. But this rejection slip, "We can't use your work at this time," sounds like bullshit. At what time might they use my fucking poem, you pencil neck geeks? I might just send some bikers for Trump down there to teach them a lesson. And I'll post my poem for all to see. Nuts. Trump can't do that anymore. Who needs these literary types anyway? A rejection slip sounds like the geekocracy dreamed it up just to piss off my base and Trump. What good is being president, I ask you, if you still get these sad rejection slips? And this poem is called Plus ça change, and ends with the completion of that well-known French idiom, plus ça change, la même chose. Plus est la même chose. Plus ça change, plus est la même chose. The more things change, the more they're the same. Okay, this one begins with the Reuters Ipso headline, gun control support fades 3 months after Florida massacre. I chose this today because many of the audience are in Florida or from Florida or of Florida. This time was going to be different. This time the losers were going to win. This time the good guys were named Emma and Cameron and David, and the survivor parents were hip, articulate, determined. And then they ran into the NRA, the intransigent bought legislators, the Second Amendment zealots, and the nation's sense of titanic inertia in favor of the status quo. And nothing changed. The wise guys were right. No massacre like Sandy Hook or Las Vegas will change the deep culture's love of aggression and guns, winners and losers. Plus, c'est la même chose. Plus, c'est la même chose. I think it's plus, not plus. You do pronounce the S in that. This is another short poem. It's called Only Reality, and it has 2 epigraphs. First is, be it life or death, we crave only reality. Henry David Thoreau. The second is, humankind cannot bear very much reality. T.S. Eliot. He'd long filled a file labeled reality with reports of any he'd found, just events deemed earthbound, without a trace of deity. Life lived beyond most norms of social convention, using constricting forms, hinting at mortal rendition. Like a scorpion enclosed in a ring of fire, jabbing himself with his own stinger, taking his own life, his only reality. This poem is called Translated, and its epigraph is by a contemporary that many of you will recognize the name of, Andrei Codrescu, the wit from New Orleans and previously in Romania. He said, we live in a perpetual state of translation. Translated. Seated at McNally Jackson's South Street Seaport, that's a bookstore, I'm listening to translators read their new American poems made from models in Farsi, Portuguese, Romanian, when my eye wanders to the culture shelves behind the readers, where a book cover announces, "What do we need men for? A modest proposal," by E. Jean Carroll, a woman who's suing the ex-president for sexual assault. And I wonder who we are and whether Swift would approve of this theft of his title for use as a subtitle. And then, before I ponder more, large white block letters on a spine a shelf higher grab my attention. CUNT is the title on a pink background. And all these fine translations now are lost as sights, sounds, and smells flood my mind and translate me into a state not foreign from literary matters. This poem I remember from a poem I studied in graduate school, which our professor told us was from the genre of the impossibility poem. And it's indebted to John Donne, whose first lines I use, and it's called Impossibility. I'd love to go and catch a falling star and get with child a mandrake root. Impossibility is such a hoot. I'd love to hug a giant oak and soar on high with the black duck, but my arms are too short and my flight would abort. Still, impossibility appeals to obstreperous, cantankerous me, impossibly drawn to futile pursuit of what's beyond the rim, while here on earth, my roots have no dearth of whim. And the final two poems from my cell phone include this one. Sometimes they won't slide up so well. This is called Crossed Hands. And it's a poem about my late mother. Crossed hands. How bare they looked, my mother's hands, without her wedding ring, after she'd pulled it off and placed it in a small envelope and handed it to me, imploring, "Please pawn it for whatever it will bring. We're broke, and I no longer need this ring." Mom was pushing 80 and bedridden with the virus that would bury her. And Dad was long past the age when he could work and never more than sporadically employed. He had no savings to tide them over. And I was just a school teacher with no big bucks. So I didn't make a fuss, but took the envelope from her withering hands and went to Emporium downtown and got a couple hundred for the ring and put the 4 grants into the envelope with 4 more of my own and returned the gift to Mom. And she took it to her heart and said, "You were always a good boy, George." And before the year was out, she died. And I made sure that in the coffin, hands crossed. Mom wore that ring, that same, on the same finger upon her hand, a symbol of her dutiful life. And this poem, which I will conclude this portion of the reading with is called Defiance. Deirdre Rourke has scoliosis, bad for dates as halitosis. Yet when she's here at dancing school, guys like me try to act real cool. Left hand raised to receive her right, and right hand resting on her hip, feeling the deviance from plum. And her left hand goes to my right shoulder, and we foxtrot around the room at my mom's Methodist church, while Miss Reeves counts out the beat and tartly checks our lustful bent, inflicting the 6-inch rule on any concupiscent couple, but not on me and Dee, for whom I will not lust till years later, after little Richard and Buddy Holly and Mary Jane have loosed desires, and I perceive at last the gleam in her deep blue, defiant eyes. So, Susanna, do you have any time left?
Mhm.
Okay, I'm going to read now from this chapbook of 1915 called Bleak Splendor, an oxymoron from a poem that I end the book about the scent of the Christ, but I'm not going to read that to begin with. I'd like to read a poem that I think of as somewhat Floridian, called At the Marina. I don't know if you have a marina far from you, but probably not. Not far from you, you probably have one. Sun glinting off white hull, the sleek boat anchored at the Sag Harbor Marina seems the locus of languor and latent excitement. Its proprietor, barefoot in deck chair, relishes a cigar. Gold letters on the stern emblazon the boat's name. Homeless Cayman Islands. The Caymans are not too far from Florida, I think. I hear the insects are terrible there. Here's a poem called Airing It Out, in which I imagine myself as an orderly at an old age home on Halloween. The inmates at the old age home are disrobing. In the assembly room, dressing gowns fall from sunken shoulders. Foundational garments pool around flat arches and twisted toes. Stats don't lie. 7 of every 10 seniors are women. But the handful of men here drop trow from gaunt flanks, allow bellies and scrotums to sag and sway as the women free flat fallen breasts from all restraint, stand shy or proud as becomes them. gray or white locks freed from caps or bands and spilled around their faces and down their backs, airing out decrepit bodies whose cells still continue to replace themselves. Handelsman has an erection and leers at Madeleine Albrecht, whose plump breasts still have heft and whose desire to copulate has never left her. Will they have a go at each other right there amidst their neighbors? Will they leave the hall for privacy's sake? Propriety is not an issue. Or will they just totter gaily on display? I can no longer wait to enter the room, my uniform whites announcing All Souls Night is spent. I helped them dress and herd them back to their rooms to dream the dark away, a few at least, refreshed by the spell that fell like a flash on dying flesh. Do we have any time left, Susanna?
You have time for probably one or two more.
Okay. I'll read the poem from which the title comes then at the end, which is short, called Savior. What did the Savior smell like? A gaff with garlic breath? A hint of death? Or like a kike? Did his teeth stink from caries? His feet from fungus? His armpits richly hairy? Like a leper's house? Whatever scent he wore, like an aura in Giotto's work, as he walked in the agora on steamy Galilee days, spinning the word, it drew swarms on his way, like a pheromone horde. Those who heard him preach savored his brown odor, his stammered speech, his bleak splendor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Thank you so much. Okay. So our next poet, Holly Iglesias, is the author of 3 collections of poetry, Sleeping Things, Angles of Approach, and Souvenirs of a Shrunken World, and a critical work, Boxing Inside the Box, Women's Prose Poetry. She is a recent Pushcart Prize winner and has been awarded fellowships by the National Endowment for the Arts, the North Carolina Arts Council, the Edward Albee Foundation, and the Massachusetts Cultural Council. Her current project is an intergenerational memoir in prose fragments with the working title, Theories of Flight. And with that, I give you Holly Iglesias. Holly?
Thank you. Thanks, Judy and Susanna, and great to be with you, George, and hear you reading. And thank all of you for being here. I'm sorry I have to switch classes. It's like different depths of field. So thank you. Most of what I'm reading today are fairly new things, which is fun. Hopefully it goes well. It's nice to have a place to read them. I'm going to start off with one that's an ekphrastic poem about a commission for a window in the Cathedral of Cologne by Gerhard Richter. And Gerhard Richter is the author of the epigraph of the poem, which title is German for the Cologne Cathedral window, Kölner Domfenster. And the epigraph is, my concern is never art. but always what art can be used for. 75 feet of tracery of multi-hued light, 11,000 squares of hand-blown glass made from Gothic formulae, the ancient materials of faith, stone, mortar, sweat, framing it. This window wrought by history and one man's refusal to assert meaning. His insistence that a good image removes certainty, shows us the thing itself. Here, 72 colors randomly arranged, stripped of all hint of symbol or cipher, thwarting the brain, deranging the senses into silence. The eyes at rest as all else is carried off, like the dust to which we shall return, like the dust from the rubble that once was Cologne, May 1942, the window of its 7 centuries old cathedral shattered as a pattern of bombings began, making infernos of in medieval German cities, Mainz, Hamburg, Stuttgart, and Dresden, Richter's birthplace. Richter, who wanted the window to have something self-evident, like the play of light altering colors, changing where they fall as the day progresses, judging the limits of belief in the visible and the invisible as it crawls across the transept floor, that place where a cross is made, where the horizontal and the vertical meet. And the next one is, thank you, also about what beauty, what survival can come out of destruction and how close we are to the bone, thinking about the very word rubble in South Florida. This one is titled Precarious, and precarious is from the Latin word for prayer. And the original meaning of the word was being dependent upon prayer or begging. Precarious. Raised in Latin, raised in ashes, raised in promise, a Cold War kid, raised in prayer, raised in want, raised in swagger, a mutually assured destruction kid, I prayed. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take, and pray now that sleeping as a child sleeps in that tower built on sand, you died before you woke, swept up by the arms of whatever God, whatever love brings mercy to each blessed thing of this world before it passes away. A love that held on to you as the tower collapsed, that holds you still as it shall hold you forever and always. Amen. And this is new, I'll just say that. Prelude to a Time Postponed. And the epigraph here is by Adam Zagajewski from his poem, Mysticism for Beginners. And the epigraph is, any journey, any kind of trip are only mysticism for beginners. If the poem be a field, the mystic prays, let it be a field of rice, and in it nuns and timid travelers. Overhead, 2 nightingales and a single heron, and waiting in the warm water, running her fingers through blades of rice, greener than any dream of green, the unknown princess who has strayed from her tower in the castle. If the poem be a field, prays the mystic, let it be a field of corn, tassels the color of every child's hair when lifted by a breeze, the breeze so longed for all summer, now here at last for harvest time, and long tables improvised from sawhorses and boards along the gravel road, heaped with ears of corn, silver queen and jubilee and peaches and cream, farm wives printing signs with crayons, fill a bag, $2, their aprons the only field of dreams I've ever known, their sweaty headscarves and blistered hands, future relics of future saints. And this one is a poem in reference to the poet Lorraine Niedecker, who lived a fairly impoverished, close to the bone life in northern Wisconsin. And she has the epigraph here. The title is Leave Me. And it's from her poem Foreclosure. May prose and poetry both die out and leave me peace. Picture her in a hat that once had a bit of flair, but that was long ago. So picture her now. Laureen, ever spare, ever wary, tramping through reeds, through muck and rubber boots and a bulky coat, faded plaid, probably a man's coat, but she's a woman in it, a woman of hard hungers and ideas honed like a felling axe. Upper Midwest Lake Country, town where the post office matters as much as the bank, but with Laureen, it's her house that matters. Just a cabin really, but hers in a way that says, I don't give a good goddamn about hanging wallpaper or anything other than reading and writing. Laureen, alone indoors and out, not much company but the typewriter, her keen eye on the neighbor screwing the lid of a popcorn can over a hole in his wall so that the wind won't mouse in, which is what Laureen does. She lays down lines, this time 8 of them, tight and tidy on the page, then looks away, maybe through the back window, the one by the pump, before raising it a crack to let the grief out and let the mouse back in. Thank you. It's kind of a mix of a coming of age and a poem about whiteness. It takes place in New Orleans in the Garden District. I went to college in New Orleans. I don't know what my parents were thinking, but I'm glad they sent me there. Changed my tires, that's for sure. Annunciation Street. The house lists a steamboat beached in the Garden District, laden with cargo from other worlds. Sugar, pestilence, the currency of flesh. Her eyes lock onto the back of a sleeping head as she bolts for the door, past the bed, the table, the evidence upon it, streetcar token, cool cigarettes, a broken cup. But this is not the set of a movie so much as its plot. She descends the stairs, angles across the chipped white face of decay, each step a departure as dawn drains of color like a body new to sex. Okay, so this is a long one, and I usually write prose poems, chunks. The cool thing about prose poems is then you can get square books. But this was long lines, and it's like a love poem to this itinerant filmmaker in North Carolina in the 30s and 40s who made these things called movies of local people and would show them before the feature films in small towns. And most of these people had never seen themselves in photographs, much less in movies. And they're all archived in the libraries in North Carolina. So you can watch hour upon hour, silent, black and white, views of a world that doesn't even exist anymore. And it's so touching, not just because it's a time that's passed, but because he, to me, is very similar to the photographer Lewis Hine, who took all those pictures of children workers in textile mills and in coal mines. And the gaze with which he looks upon people, just as Hine did, it's so clear he loves everyone he's shooting. And it's just an overwhelming experience to watch the flow of images through the eyes of someone who is that fond of the people he's filming. And the title, Kannapolis, is a town in North Carolina. Kannapolis, 1941, Reel 2. So beautiful, the men in hats, the straw boaters and fedoras and caps. So beautiful, the ladies in ladies' dresses, summer cottons, dotted Swiss, gingham checks, rowdy plaids. So beautiful, the string bag of onions and the basket of canned goods and the boxes tied with twine. So beautiful, the children holding hands, bashful in front of the camera, 2 of them toothless. So beautiful, the youth leaving the mill, overalls flecked with thread, sleeves rolled up to show off his muscles, machine oil on his chin. So beautiful, the girl, whippet thin and haughty, rushing to move past the camera until someone shouts her name and she breaks into a smile. So beautiful, the men smoking on the curb outside the courthouse, the lawyer strolling behind them in a seersucker suit and 2-tone shoes. So beautiful, the mule pulling a wagon heaped with cartons of peaches and berries. So beautiful, the driver of the wagon and the mule. So beautiful, the grocer in a pristine apron, unrolling the awnings to protect the lettuce from the noonday sun. So beautiful, the grandma in her house dress and lace-up shoes, a boy on one hand, a girl on the other, each licking a lollipop. So beautiful, the bodies passing by, so beautiful, the haircuts and cloth jackets, so beautiful, the dungarees spiffed up with a Sunday shirt. So beautiful, the plate of navy beans with ham and red-eye gravy and 2 yeast rolls to sop up the gravy. Beautiful, the girls who scowl, the girls who grin. So beautiful, the boy who looks away. So beautiful, the mothers outside the shoe store, gazing at the new pumps and Oxfords behind the glass. So beautiful, the running board, where the men rest, chewing the fat, bone-tired and laughing. So beautiful, the tongues-licking ice cream cones. So beautiful, the bare arms in sunsuits. So beautiful, the hats set at flirtatious angles. So beautiful, the man behind the lens, the man who loves their flowing by. So beautiful, the river of their days. Thank you. 2 more. One of them is it's called Theories of Flight, and it's hopefully like a multi-generational memoir. And this is about my grandfather in his drugstore. He and all of his brothers were pharmacists, as were their children. So there was many generations of drugstores in St. Louis that were Krummenacher drugstores. And there was a great deal of anti-German sentiment, obviously, during World War I, which is referred to here. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. His nickname was Doodles, and my grandma's nickname was Dode. Doodles and Dode, I mean, is that cute or what? Anyway, Doodles between the First Great War and the next. Fatherhood arrived on a tide of sweets, Milky Ways, Lifesavers, Baby Ruth, root beer floats, lemon phosphates. Doodles the buoyant, the unflappable, a happy man. So confectionery, Dode sighed. The cousins and uncles, the in-laws and maiden aunts sprawled beneath a cottonwood, dabbing chicken fat and beer from their lips as Doodle waded into the Merrimack River. Floating on his back, he bobbed on the current like a lure at the end of a slack line, glad to escape the city. A proprietor now, a man of means, with a store that grew busier by the day, the soda fountain a refuge for secretaries and postmen, milliners and mechanics, the counters heaped with ponds and wildroot, Zippo and beechnut, the stockroom jammed with jars of lanolin, boxes of mineral salts, bottles of paregoric, of tincture of iodine, of quinine, of gentian violet, and stashed away on the highest shelf that had broken the glass, still wrapped in paper, upon which was written, Kaiser lover, get out. Baby powder and aspirin, chewing gum and witch hazel, abundance and shame, all of it piling up like debris in a spring flood, and then the crash. I actually have 2 more, sorry. Because one of them when we started, George asked me if I was born into being a Spanish speaker, and I was not. And so this poem is in the Miami section of this book, Sleeping Things. And it's about the lottery, La Charada Cubana, where you like pick images to bet numbers on and things like that. And basically what it's about is I'm trying to make English and Spanish rhyme, and they don't quite. Are any of you Spanish speakers? Some Spanish? Yes, okay.
Poco, poco.
La Charada Cubana, a world of things. The goat, a bee, 6 nuns by the sea, El Capitan Guapo bicycling. The cat, the sky, un caracol, maleta, corbata, an angry bull. Whip, payaso, a basket of eels, palm fronds, lightning, St. Catherine's wheel. Matanza, shark, snake, cachimba, paloma, the fiery lake. Bruja, ladle, monkey, whore, fortuna behind the closed door. Gallo, braggart, asesino, runt. Sapo, lengua, the shoes of a dunce. Cuchillo, limon, a queen on her stool. Tijera, bananas, ratones, the fool. River, araña, pluma, remorse. Conejo, cochino, death on a horse.
That's great.
I have to change the whore thing when there's little kids in the audience. Anyway, to spore. So the last one I'll read is a poem of my home place. St. Louis is on the confluence of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, which is a very fertile place and precarious when the spring floods come. And the title, Father, Won't You Carry Me, of course, refers to the Mississippi, which is the father of waters. Father, won't you carry me, carry me. The first time I saw the Mississippi from the air, I knew my place. And I knew that home was a sinuous ribbon lacing east to west, past to future, bondage to possibility, appearing and disappearing like a snake in new mown hay as the sun flashed on its surface. Many times I have crossed the bridge that takes me home, then takes me away again, by car, by train, and even on foot. The current electric beneath me as St. Louis crouches on the western bank like a weary roustabout. Each spring the river swells there, rolls out of its ancient bed to sweep away all that is dead or forgotten, all that is foolish or weak. The debris tumbling inevitably south, Spinet, Inspire, Cottonwood, and Calf. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So let's have a round of applause for both Holly and George, if we could. And I know that Judy has